My name is Rachel, and the day my pastor used my bank statement as a sermon illustration, I learned two painful lessons. 1. Some people will use your vulnerability as stage material. 2. Spiritual authority without accountability is just control with nicer clothes. I wish I'd learned those lessons a different way. Not in front of 200 people. Not while I sat on the third pew from the front, cheeks burning, listening to my debt totals roll off the pulpit like a grocery list. At 20, I thought telling the truth in church would save me. Instead, it lit a fuse. It took years for that fuse to reach anything that looked like justice. By the time it did, I wasn't the broke girl anymore. I was a banker, a lender, a quiet owner of other people's debt, including, eventually, the debt on the building where I'd once bowed my head in shame. I grew up in a small town in Georgia where church wasn't just something you did on Sundays. It was an ecosystem. Social life, charity, babysitting, networking. Our church, New Hope Community, sat on the edge of town next to a soybean field. White steeple, blue carpet, folding chairs in the fellowship hall that pinched your legs if you weren't careful. My mom and I were there constantly. Sunday school, Sunday service, Wednesday Bible study, youth group on Fridays. If the doors were open, we were inside. Mom was a single parent. My dad left when I was 6 months old and never came back except via the occasional inconsistent child support payment the state had to drag out of him. We didn't have extended family nearby. The church became that. People brought casseroles when Mom got the flu. Ladies from the Prayer Warriors group slipped us grocery store gift cards at Christmas. Men from the Deacons Board helped fix our leaky roof once. Our pastor, Pastor Tim, was a charismatic man in his 40s with perfectly combed hair and a voice that could make you cry or shout amen on cue. He preached about sin and salvation, hell and hope, tithing. A lot about tithing. Money is a test, he'd say, pacing in front of the pulpit. God watches what you do with little before he gives you much. Don't you dare rob him with your excuses. People nodded, waved envelopes. We dropped in our 10%, sometimes out of faith, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of fear. Bring your burdens to the altar, he'd say at the end of every service. This is a safe place. I believed him. That's the part that stings the most now. At 19, I moved out. It wasn't some dramatic rebellion. It was necessity. Mom worked as a receptionist at a clinic and cleaned offices at night. We had a tiny rental. When my share of the bills in school ran up against her mounting medical issues, I packed my stuff and moved into a cheap apartment with 2 other girls from church. We thought we were grown. In reality, we were barely keeping our heads above water. I worked part-time at a grocery store and took classes at the community college. I learned very quickly how easy it was to get into debt when your car broke down, your work hours got cut. Your financial literacy consisted of just trust God. First it was a store card. 10% off your first purchase if you signed up. Then it was a regular credit card the teller at my bank pre-approved me for because I seemed responsible. Then it was a medical bill from a kidney infection that went sideways. Then it was another card to juggle the others. Within a year, despite genuinely trying to keep up, I had 3 credit cards, 1 past-due medical bill, a car payment. Total debt, just over $18,000. For some people, that amount might not sound catastrophic. For me, making $9 an hour and taking 9 credit hours of classes, it felt like drowning with pockets full of rocks. I stopped sleeping, stopped answering unknown phone numbers, stopped opening every piece of mail. I still tithed 10% of my gross income, because Pastor Tim said that not tithing would curse my finances. I was terrified of them getting any worse. Spoiler: fear is a terrible budgeting strategy. One night, after another anxiety spiral over bills, my roommate suggested I talk to Pastor Tim. He's always saying the church is family, she said. Maybe they can help. Or at least pray. He talks to people about money all the time. I'd heard his sermons about getting out of debt. They usually ended with words like deliverance, and started with verses like the borrower is servant to the lender. Still, he was the authority figure I trusted most. So the following Wednesday, after Bible study, I waited until the crowd thinned and approached him by the stage. "Pastor Tim?" I said, heart hammering. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure, Sister Rachel," he said with his practiced smile. What's on your heart? I swallowed. Words felt heavy. I'm struggling, I said. With money. Debt. I've been trying to budget, but things keep happening. I don't know what to do. I was wondering if you had advice, or if someone in the church does. Quietly. His face shifted slightly. A flicker of interest. Debt, huh? He said. Credit cards? Loans? I nodded, mortified. How much? He asked. I hesitated. About 18,000, I whispered. His eyebrows shot up. That's not nothing, he said. I know, I said quickly. I'm not asking for money. Just prayer. Maybe some guidance. It's scaring me. He put a hand on my shoulder. We'll definitely pray, he said. Let me think about how to address this. You know, a lot of young people are in the same boat. Maybe your testimony could help others. My stomach twisted. I don't want to be an example, I said. This is really embarrassing. He smiled. Sometimes God uses our shame to reach others, he said. Don't worry. I won't use your name. Just be in service Sunday morning. I think the Lord has a word. I walked home feeling about 50% relieved and 50% nauseous. I should have listened to the nausea. That Sunday, service started like any other. Songs, clapping, announcements, tithes and offerings. Pastor Tim took the stage with that particular energy he got when he thought he had a zinger. Church, today we're going to talk about debt, he announced. Can I get an amen? Amen, people said. My throat went dry. He paced. He quoted verses. He told a story about how, when he was young, he almost ruined his ministry by buying a fancy car. Then he shifted. Just this week, he said, a young woman in this very church came to me with a heavy burden. Listen to me now, because this is serious. He looked out over the congregation. My hands started to shake. Pastor Tim didn't say my name. He didn't have to. We were a small church. People knew who lived with who worked where, who drove what. She's 20 years old, he said. She doesn't own a house. She doesn't have kids. But she has, for a fact, over $18,000 in consumer debt. Murmurs. Gasps. I wanted the carpet to open and swallow me. My roommate glanced at me, horrified. He kept going. She said she can't afford to tithe, he said, making air quotes. She said she tries her best, but the bills keep piling up. She wanted the church to pray over her debt. He leaned on the pulpit. And we will pray, he said. But church, hear me. This is not primarily a math problem. This is a spiritual problem. This is what happens when we trust Visa more than we trust Jehovah Jireh. Laughter. Nervous. He riffed for 20 more minutes. About Starbucks. About buying phones you can't afford. About people who blame capitalism instead of their own lack of self-control. He said, some of you are in sin with your money. You want God to bless a mess. You want the church to bail you out while you refuse to change your lifestyle. Every so often he'd glance in my direction. Not long enough to be obvious. Long enough that I saw at least 3 people follow his gaze. At the end, he said, if you're here today and you're in bondage to debt, I want you to stand up. Right where you are. Don't be ashamed. The first step is confession. People shifted. A few stood. My roommate squeezed my hand. I stayed seated. I'd already been made into a sermon. I wasn't going to complete his altar call. After service, no one came to quietly slip me an envelope or offer budgeting help. A few people said vague things like, convicting word today, huh, Rachel? One older woman told me, if you just tithe faithfully, God would take care of the rest. I went home and cried until my eyes were swollen shut. Then I stopped going to church. For a while, leaving felt like losing oxygen. Church had been my social network, my calendar, my safety net. Suddenly I was out. People texted at first. Missed you Sunday. You okay? I know that sermon was hard, but Pastor Tim loves you. I ignored most of them. When my mother called, worried, I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he shouldn't have done that to you. Her saying that out loud meant more than any of the half-baked he meant well excuses I got from others. If you want to come to my church instead for a while, you can, she added. Her church, a tiny congregation across town, had its own problems. But they didn't weaponize the offering plate the same way. I went a few times. Sat in the back. kept my head down. Mostly, I stopped looking for spiritual answers to financial problems. I started looking for financial ones. I got another job, left the grocery store, went to work as a teller at a local credit union. Day 1, they sat us down in training and explained checking versus savings, interest, credit reports, debt-to-income ratios. I realized, with a sick twist, that my pastor had known more about how money worked than I did, and he'd chosen to shame me instead of teach me. My new coworkers did the opposite. They answered questions, showed me examples, let me sit with the loan officers as they reviewed applications. I saw numbers on screens and stories behind them. People with medical debt, divorce costs. Some got loans, some didn't. What struck me was how the system didn't care how faithful they'd been with tithes. It cared whether they'd made payments, whether they had collateral, whether the math worked. I started taking online classes in finance, budgeting, credit repair. I made a spreadsheet of every debt I had, card balances, interest rates, minimum payments. Then I made another column, plan. I cut expenses, moved to a cheaper room, stopped tithing for a while, which felt like heresy at first, but made the numbers finally move. I snowballed the smallest debts first, then rolled those payments into the next. It took 5 years. But I paid off every non-student loan line. Watching those account balances hit zero did more for my faith than any sermon ever had. Not faith in the prosperity gospel. Faith in my ability to learn, to change, to steward. At 27, with my own debts under control, I moved from teller to small business lending. We did loans for mom-and-pop shops, daycares, churches. Because at the end of the day, to a lender, a church is a corporation with cash flow and assets. We didn't look at tithing records. We looked at attendance trends, giving patterns, debt load, leadership stability. If you'd told me at 19 that I'd be underwriting mortgages for sanctuaries and fellowship halls, I would have laughed. It felt oddly appropriate, maybe even redemptive. Faith without spreadsheets is dead, I joked once in the break room. No one found it as funny as I did. The more I learned, the more I realized how reckless some pastors were with money. Taking on million-dollar building projects because God told them, with no realistic plan for repayment. Buying sound systems that cost more than members' houses. Pushing faith pledges to cover the gap. I also saw churches that did it right. Building size to their community. Financial transparency. No guilt-tripping. I made a quiet promise to myself. If I ever had to choose between preserving a building and enabling financial abuse, I'd pick people every time. I didn't know I'd get that choice with my own old church. After a few years in lending, I started getting interested in a niche corner of the industry, note investing. In plain English, buying other people's loans. Sometimes performing, sometimes not. Sometimes as a bank employee, sometimes through private funds. Distressed notes loans where the borrower was behind could be sold at a discount to investors willing to take on the risk and do the work of collecting or restructuring. It was a whole world of spreadsheets, risk models, ugly real estate photos. I liked it. Not because I enjoyed foreclosures. Because I enjoyed understanding how the levers worked. I also saw it as a way to be, in a small way, the kind of lender I wished I'd had when I was young. Firm, not cruel. Willing to restructure, not willing to be manipulated. I saved, built up my own emergency fund, got my own small LLC set up to participate in note deals. Nothing huge, just enough to have skin in the game when opportunities arose. One day, my mentor, Dan, slid a list across my desk. Got a batch of small commercial notes for sale from another lender, he said. Strip malls, warehouses, a few churches. Anything ring a bell for you? I scanned the spreadsheet. Addresses, loan balances, status. New Hope Community Church balance, $680,000 status. Non-performing 120 plus days past due. My heart stuttered. New Hope. My New Hope. Pastor Tim's New Hope. I double-checked the address. Same soybean field. Same white steeple. Same blue carpet probably, though I hadn't seen it in years. Everything okay? Dan asked. I forced my face to stay neutral. Yeah, I said. Just recognizing a name. Local to where I grew up. What's their story? He shrugged. Typical, he said. Booming in the 2000s, took out a big mortgage to build a bigger sanctuary. Attendance declined, giving dropped. They kept paying pastors more than they could afford. Missed payments. Bank wants out. Any idea how underwater they are? I asked. He pointed to a column. Property value. Roughly $550,000 on a good day. Loan balance. $680,000 plus arrears. Upside down. Upside down spiritually and financially. I stared at the screen. This wasn't just any note. This was the building where my teenage self had believed that confession would equal grace. Where my debt totals had been recited like a cautionary tale. Where the pastor now had his own debt problem he couldn't sermon his way out of. Are we bidding on this batch? I asked. I'm considering it, Dan said. We can probably get them at 60 cents on the dollar. Work out deals where we can. Foreclose where we have to. If you want in on any, now's the time. I thought about conflict of interest. About ethics. About whether wanting this specific note was petty. Then I thought about the times I'd helped borrowers restructure. The times I'd said no when people begged for terms that made no sense. The times I'd watched financial irresponsibility hide behind religious language. I want this one, I said quietly, pointing to New Hope's row. Personally. Through my LLC. If it makes sense. Dan raised an eyebrow. Personal history? He asked. I nodded. Ugly, I said. But I can be objective. He studied me for a long moment. Okay, he said. We'll run the numbers like we would any other. If it pencils out, you can take it down. Just remember, don't do anything in this deal you wouldn't do if you'd never stepped foot in that building. I won't, I said. I meant it. Most of me did anyway. We did our due diligence. We got the original loan documents, payment history, copies of their financial statements, board minutes from the last year. The picture that emerged was depressingly familiar. 10 years earlier, in the height of some revival, Pastor Tim had convinced the board God was calling them to expand. Make room for what God will do, he'd written in a letter to members, which I now read as a PDF. They took out a large mortgage with an aggressive amortization, built a bigger sanctuary, new sound system, LED screens, coffee bar. For a while, attendance went up. So did giving. Then, a scandal in a sister church across town. COVID. Politics. People tired of being yelled at about money. The numbers trickled down. They'd refinanced once at a slightly lower rate, pulled out extra cash to complete the vision. Now they were out of magic tricks. Their last 3 financial reports showed negative cash flow 3 quarters in a row, past due utility bills. Pastor Tim still drawing a full-time salary well above the median for churches their size. The current lender had sent default notices, started foreclosure proceedings, was now willing to sell the note at a discount to get it off their books. We bid. We got it. My LLC, with Dan's firm as backup partner, became the new mortgage holder on New Hope Community Church. No one in the building knew. To them, the letters just started coming from a different return address. Please remit all future payments to. They were about to find out there was an actual person behind that P.O. box, and that she remembered more than numbers. Our first step was standard. We sent a hello/notice of assignment letter. Dear borrower, your loan has been sold to LLC name. Your obligations remain the same. Here is the current payoff. You are currently X days past due. Please contact us to discuss options. A week later, the church's treasurer called. Mr. Hastings. I recognized his name from my youth. He'd been the one counting offerings at the back table. Hi, this is Mark Hastings from New Hope Community Church, he said. We got your letter. We're a little confused. Our bank sold our loan? Yes, sir, I said, using my work voice. We've purchased the note. We're the new lender. We wanted to set up a time to go over the status and discuss possibilities. He sounded relieved. Oh good, he said. Our old bank was being really harsh. Maybe you'll be easier to work with. We've had a rough few years, but we're turning a corner. Giving is going up. Pastor says this is a test. I scheduled a call, requested updated financials. I approached it like any other distressed borrower. When we got on the Zoom call a week later, it was me, Mark, And Pastor Tim. He'd insisted on joining as head of the church. His hair was grayer. His Bible looked the same. "Thank you for meeting with us," I said. "We'd like to understand where things stand and see if there's a path forward that works for everyone." He smiled that same stage smile. "God bless you for your willingness," he said. "We believe the Lord is going to bring us through this storm." I kept my face neutral. Dan dove into the numbers. "You're 6 months behind on payments," he said. "Total arrears of X. Based on your statements, your monthly income barely covers operating expenses, even without the mortgage. What's your realistic plan to catch up?" Pastor Tim launched into a monologue about faith pledges and upcoming conferences. I interrupted. Politely. "Do you have any written commitments, pledge cards, contracts?" I asked. Silence. Mark cleared his throat. "People have promised," he said. "But nothing written yet. So your plan is hypothetical," I said. "In the meantime, the loan remains in default." Dan laid out options. Bring the loan current, unlikely. Modify terms with a realistic payment. Sell the building and downsize to a rental space. Or, if they did nothing, face foreclosure. They balked at anything that involved admitting the building might be too much. "This is God's house," Pastor Tim said, leaning forward. "We can't just walk away from it. We dedicated it to Him." "This is also collateral," I said calmly. "For a loan you signed. We can't ignore that." He frowned at me, like I'd just blasphemed. "What's your name again?" he asked. "Rachel," I said. His eyes narrowed. "From New Hope?" he asked slowly. "You look familiar." I watched recognition dawn. He paled. "Rachel Turner?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I grew up there." Silence. Mark looked between us, confused. "I left years ago," I added, voice even. "I'm here now as your lender's representative, not as a member." He swallowed. "Then you know this church," he said. "You know our heart. You know we do good work." I did. I also knew they'd publicly dissected my finances while preaching compassion. "Some good work," I said. "Some harm." Dan shot me a look that said careful. I took a breath. "Let me be clear," I said. "I'm not here to punish you for anything in the past. I'm here to solve a present financial problem. The building's loan is unsustainable under current conditions. We need a concrete plan, not just faith language." He regrouped. "We'll pray," he said. "We'll fast. God will provide." "God may," I said. "But He's going to have to cut a check to our P.O. box like everyone else." Dan coughed to hide a laugh. "Over the next 3 months, we gave them chances. We offered to reduce the interest rate in exchange for a lump sum catch-up. They couldn't do it. Offered to extend the term and lower the monthly payment if they sold an unused piece of adjacent land and applied proceeds to the principal. They refused. That land is for our future youth center. Suggested they cut expenses, including Pastor Tim's salary, to free up cash. He said the worker is worthy of his wages. Meanwhile, they made one partial payment. Then nothing. They sent long, flowery letters about standing in faith against the enemy. We sent short, factual notices about events of default. At one point, Pastor Tim called my personal cell, which he must have gotten from an old directory. "Rachel," he said, slipping into his pastoral tone. "I know we had our differences. I may have been too hard on you once, but surely you wouldn't let them take God's house. Not after all this church has done for you." I exhaled. "This building is not God's only house," I said. "And what you did to me wasn't just hard. It was wrong. You used my pain as content. I forgave you for that for my own sake. But forgiveness doesn't erase contracts. There's grace," he insisted. "There is," I agreed. "But grace doesn't pay mortgages." He tried a different tack. "The community will see you as the one who shut us down," he warned. "Are you ready for that reputation? If that happens, I'll live with it," I said. "Because I know the full story. And so does God if we're keeping Him in the conversation." He sputtered. "You think you're righteous," he said. "No," I said. "I think I'm tired of people using His name to dodge math." I hung up. Documented the call. Forwarded the summary to Dan. He replied, "Time to move to enforcement. Foreclosure is not fun. Not as a borrower. Not as a lender. It's a slow, expensive process involving notices, court filings, auctions." We filed. New Hope hired a lawyer. He sent us sanctimonious letters about destroying a ministry. We responded with copies of the note, the missed payments, the failed modification attempts. In court, we didn't bring up sermons, just sums. The judge, a secular man who'd probably only set foot in church for weddings and funerals, was unmoved by theological arguments. The plaintiff holds the note, he said. The defendant is in default. There has been opportunity to cure. Judgment for the plaintiff. Foreclosure authorized. A sale date was set. We posted notices. Online. On the courthouse bulletin board. On the church door. I watched a photo of the building I'd once thought of as holy sit on a county website next to warehouses and rental houses. On the day of the sale, a few members stood on the lawn holding signs. Stop the enemy, God will provide. We made a decision as a note holder. We would bid our credit at the auction, a credit bid, and take title ourselves as the new owner rather than letting some random investor snag it for pennies. That would give us more control over what happened next. We did. No one outbid us. For the second time in my life, I became connected to that property in a legally binding way. The first had been as a child of a member. The second, as owner. Well, as representative of owner. That felt intense. We had options. We could sell the building to another congregation, lease it back under new management, turn it into something else entirely. We had to consider market value, community needs, our mission as lenders and investors. Quietly, I pushed for one condition in any sale or lease. Pastor Tim could not remain as senior pastor of any group occupying the building. Not out of vengeance. Out of pattern. Financial mismanagement. Spiritual manipulation around money. We had documentation of both. Dan and our attorney agreed. We don't want to get dragged into another cycle with him at the helm, Dan said. We started reaching out to other churches and nonprofits. Within a few months, we had a bite. A smaller, more stable church across town led by a pastor I actually respected was looking for a permanent home. They'd outgrown their rented storefront, saved a solid down payment, operated on a pay cash or don't buy it philosophy. We negotiated. They didn't take on a massive new mortgage. They signed a manageable one. They agreed to use part of the building during the week as a community center, offer space to AA groups, after-school tutoring, and food distribution. We closed. New Hope Community Church, as a legal entity, ceased to exist in that form. Some members joined the new congregation. Some scattered. Pastor Tim tried to start a house church. According to my mom, who still heard everything through the grapevine, it fizzled. He eventually moved states. I didn't dance. I didn't cheer. I just felt like a circle had closed. A few months after the sale, I went to see the building. Not as a spy. As an invited guest. The new pastor, Pastor Renee, had asked if I'd come to the dedication service. We want to acknowledge what came before, she said, and commit to doing better with what we've been given. It would mean a lot if you were there, given your history. I sat in the back. The carpet was new. Not blue. Neutral gray. The worship was different. Softer. Less performance, more participation. At one point, Pastor Renee addressed the elephant in the room. This building has a complicated story, she said. Some of you grew up here. Some of you were hurt here. Some of you are here for the first time and just see 4 walls and a roof. She looked around. We're not here to pretend none of that happened, she said. We're here to say, going forward we will be transparent. With money. With power. With each other. We will not use shame as a tool. We will not build beyond what we can pay for and call it faith. We will treat this mortgage as a responsibility, not a test of God. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. After the service, a few people hugged me. Some recognized me from long ago. Some knew me only as the banker who helped. One older woman, who'd been in the 3rd pew the day of my shaming, squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have stood up for you back then. I'm okay, I said. We're here now. She nodded. God used you, she said. Just not the way that Pastor thought he would. People love a clean revenge story. They want the villain to get dragged publicly. The hero to monologue. The crowd to cheer. My story wasn't like that. My revenge was paperwork, contracts, a few firm no's in conference calls and courtrooms. It was choosing, over and over, not to let old shame make me sloppy. I could have tried to spike their interest rate, refused any modification offers out of spite, taunted Pastor Tim. I didn't. Because I know what it's like to be on the other end of a power imbalance. I wasn't going to recreate that imbalance just with roles flipped. What I did do was hold the line on reality, refuse to be manipulated by religious language, steer the property into hands that would treat it with care. Years earlier, when Pastor Tim had listed my debts from the pulpit, he'd said, "God is not a banker." Maybe not. But he definitely used one. At least in my story. To make sure a building that had once been a stage for spiritualized financial abuse became a place where money and ministry could actually coexist without devouring each other. So yes, my pastor publicly shamed me for debt. He turned my private confession into content. He told people not to enable me while passing the offering plate again. Years later, I quietly bought the mortgage on his church. I didn't shout about it. I didn't stand on the stage and announce, "Remember me?" I signed documents, sent notices, showed up in the rooms where math and mercy meet. And for once, I got to help decide which one spoke louder. Thank you for listening to my story.